Hello, hello, hello. Um, I had a video and I don't know, I don't think it's playing, but you guys can hear me and it says I'm live. So hi. Oh my goodness. Um, I did have a video. I promise you that I had a song made by AI. It was all punk ska. It was cool. Um, I don't think it played though. So, oh, and now all of a sudden I have me going in three-way in my head. There we go. So let's try this again. Deep breath. Hello, people. How's everyone today? Ah, we see you. Good, good. StreamYard's been a mess all week. Yeah, well, you will blame it on StreamYard. That's what we'll do. We'll blame it on StreamYard. Um, hello, hello. I see everyone in there. Thank you, Miss K Grift. I'll see you when I see you. And Shenny and Dom and Cynthia. Oh, wow. I saw Queen's name in there. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. JK's here but can't participate because he's working. That's fine. So, okay. This is me streaming my own stuff. Mighty and I do the Mystery Babylon series on Tuesday evenings, and it's it's a lot of fun, actually. We're learning an awful lot. It's very interesting to see how that other religion, the religion that, according to conspiracy theory, it's the other religion of the world, is the one that runs the world behind the scenes, the people who pull the strings of the presidents and prime ministers of the world. So the guy who was able to compile all of that information together, his name was William Cooper. He wrote a book. It's called Behold a Pale Horse. It's just tuned in. Okay, thank you. Get back to work. I will. So I've got it on audiobook, but they don't have all parts recorded on audiobook. So today we're going to go through, we'll quickly read the little blurbs that I had in front, the introduction and foreword. It'll give you a really good idea of who Bill Cooper was, the positions he held in United States military, and how he was able to get the information he has gotten and compiled for the book. He had a group he started called CAGI. I'm pretty sure it's defunct now, unfortunately. But it was basically citizens working together to collect information about what was going on, what their government was doing. His studies of the Mystery Babylon came out of his studies into his own government. They were really about keeping the government in check, honestly. And I guess they would have been considered a militia. A lot of them were ex-military, but they had a whole network across all of the United States, and they did phenomenal work. So with that, yeah, let's get to it. So it's called Behold the Pale Horse. His full name is Milton William Cooper. I will be reading from a first edition, copyright 1991. There are later editions, but I have been told, and I've seen for myself, that later editions have been edited. In fact, the audiobook that I've got, I think it's missing 4 hours worth of audiobook reading, because it's a later edition and they edited out parts that weren't as friendly to the cause, I guess. You know who they are. Hi, Bobby. Good to see you. We all know who they are. It's the people that have control of the media and the internet and who sees what. and how they understand things to happen. Even when we see a person almost get shot in the head, they're able to erase it off the video and tell us that we didn't see it and it never happened and it's all fake. So we know how they are. And because of that, I will occasionally be reading straight from the book. And there are lots of diagrams and whatnot that I will be sharing with you as it comes up. So right off the top, he says, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with the beasts of the earth." And that's the Holy Bible, Revelations chapter 6, verse 8. "The ideas and conclusions expressed in this work are mine alone. It is possible that one or more conclusions may be wrong. The purpose of this book is to convince you, the reader, that something is terribly wrong. It is my hope that this work will inspire you to begin an earnest search for the truth. Your conclusions may be different, but together, maybe we can build a better world." And it's got his signature right down there. And then he's got a poem from Delamere Duveras. It says, "One basic truth can be used as a foundation for a mountain of lies. And if we dig down deep enough in the mountain of lies and bring out that truth to set it on top of the mountain of lies, the entire mountain of lies will crumble under the weight of that one truth. And there is nothing more devastating to a structure of lies than the revelation of the truth upon which the structure of lies was built, because the shock waves of the revelation of the truth reverberate and continue to reverberate throughout the earth for generations to follow, awakening even those people who had no desire to be awakened to the truth." And that's what we hope to do here. He dedicated the book to his children, Jenny, Tony, Jessica, and little Dorothy. He says, "I love you every moment of every day." And I hope that's something that you will see shine through as well. He's a really a very harsh man, a very blunt man. He said the truth, no matter whether you wanted to hear it or not, and he did not brook fools lightly. So he comes off very harsh, but if you watch his shows and listen to him, he has his daughter regularly read the Pledge of, well, no, she had it memorized, but she does the Pledge of Allegiance to open a lot of his shows. You can tell he really did love his family. They were the most important thing to him, and that is why he did everything that he did. So his acknowledgement says, "My deepest appreciation and warmest friendship is extended to all the wonderful people who have helped make this book a reality. I especially thank those listed below who made outstanding contributions. Some have taken great risks. Annie, for your understanding and all of the sandwiches. Little Dorothy, for the happiness. Barbara Ann and husband, Ron and Karen Brown, Taryn Crive, Jane Drucker, the November 5th, 1989 volunteers, Ron Rieger, Keith Ranch, Gordon Davis, Billy Goodman, Stanley and Elma Barrington, Roger Scherer, Glenn and Cheryl, the people who sent letters from Minnesota, Nancy Batchelder, Sal from Rhode Island, Mike Whelan, Joe Hissong, JMP, William Steinman, Tal Levesque, Pavel, Roger and Karen LaChance, Orion Swanson, Jean Ann, Anthony Hilder, Leota Reinhardt, Tim Bennett, and all who are acknowledged in the text. And to all others who have so freely given, I thank you." The introduction. Some time ago, I had the opportunity to meet William Cooper and his wife Annie. It was part of my job to verify whether this man did indeed speak the truth or was just another person seeking fame and fortune. What I found was a rugged, bulldog driven individual who was kind, thoughtful, and tender hearted. He was truly concerned about you and your welfare. Bill knew that people were badly informed by a society which spoon feeds you deception until there is no distinction between fiction and reality. He sees what many others see happening, and he is not afraid to do something about it. There are many who do not want you to know what Bill has to say. They have tried many times to stop him from saying it. The scars on his face and the loss of his leg are his badges of sincerity on your behalf. No one becomes popular by telling people the truth. History records what happened to the true prophets of the past. However, some have listened to their warnings and were not caught off guard. Others have put their heads in the sand and refused to listen. Bill has it together and has put it together for you, so you can also be one of the informed of the world. As well-informed a person can make the right decision. William Cooper has my vote of approval because I cared enough to find out who the man is. Now is your opportunity. And that's from Barbara Ann. I believe she was a journalist. All right, here we go. The man's own words. There have been many related sequential coincidences all throughout my life. Incidences that by themselves would have led nowhere. Statistically, the odds against the same or a related sequence of events happening to one individual are astronomically high. It is this series of incidents that have convinced me that God has had a hand in my life. I do not believe in fate. I do not believe in accidents. I cannot and will not accept the theory that long sequences of unrelated accidents determine world events. It is inconceivable that those with power and wealth would not band together with a common bond, a common interest, and a long-range plan to decide and direct the future of the world. For those with the resources to do otherwise would be totally irresponsible. I know that I would be the first to organize a conspiracy to control the outcome of the future if I were such a person and a conspiracy did not yet exist. I would do it in an attempt to ensure the survival of the principles in which I believe, the survival of my family, my survival, and the survival of the human race, if for no other reason. I believe, therefore, that a grand game of chess is being played on a level that we can barely imagine, and we are the pawns. Pawns are valuable only under certain circumstances and are frequently sacrificed to gain an advantage. Anyone who has studied military strategy is familiar with the concept of sacrifice, and those who have seriously studied history have probably discovered the real reason we go to war on the regularly scheduled basis. Before reading this book, I advise you to play at least 2 complete games of chess. You must learn the rules they play by. You must realize objectively that some pieces are more valuable than others, and the king is the most valuable of all. You cannot learn reality if you get caught up in the fantasy that it's not fair. You must come to know that the ultimate outcome of the game is the only thing that counts. You were lied to when you were told that it does not matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Winning in the world of the elite is everything. Indeed, it is the only thing. The power elite intend to win. My research has shown at this point that the future laid out for us may be just about impossible to change. I do not agree with the means by which the powerful few have chosen for us to reach the end. I do not agree that the end is where we should end at all. But unless we can wake the people from their sleep, nothing short of civil war will stop the planned outcome. I base that statement not on defeatism, but on the apathy of the majority of the American people. 25 years ago, I would have believed otherwise. But 25 years ago, I was also sound asleep. We have been taught lies. Reality is not at all what we perceive it to be. We cannot survive any longer by hanging on to the falsehoods of the past. Reality must be discerned at all costs if we are to be a part of the future. Truth must prevail in all instances, no matter who it hurts or helps, if we are to continue to live upon this earth. At this point, what we want may no longer matter. It is what we must do to ensure our survival that counts. The old way is in the certain process of destruction, and a new world order is beating down the door. To cling to the past is guaranteed self-exing. To remain apathetic is assured enslavement. To learn the truth and then act upon it is the only means of survival at this moment. To shrug off the information contained in this book and to disregard its warning will result in the complete destruction of the Republic of the United States of America. You will never get a second warning or a second chance. Like it or not, this is it, stark reality. You can no longer turn your head, ignore it, pretend it's not true, say it can't happen to me, run, or hide. The wolf is at the door. I fear for the little ones, the innocents, who are already paying for our mistakes. There exists a great army of occupationally orphaned children. They are attending government-controlled daycare centers and latchkey kids who are running wild in the streets. That was me. And the lopsided, emotionally wounded children of single welfare mothers born only for the sake of more money in the monthly check. Open your eyes and look at them, for they are the future. In them, I see the sure and certain destruction of this once proud nation. In their vacant eyes, I see the death of freedom. They carry with them a great emptiness, and someone will surely pay a great price for their suffering. If we do not act in concert with each other and ensure that the future becomes what we need it to be, then we will surely deserve whatever fate awaits us. I believe with all my heart that God put me in places and in positions throughout my life so that I would be able to deliver this warning to his people. I pray that I have been worthy and that I have done my job. This is my creed. I believe first in God, in the same God in which my ancestors believed. I believe in Jesus Christ and that he is my Savior. Second, I believe in the Constitution of the Republic of the United States of America, without interpretation, as it was written and meant to work. I have given my sacred oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I intend to fulfill that oath. And third, I believe in the family unit, and in particular, my family unit. I have sworn that I will give my life, if it is required, in defense of God, the Constitution, or my family. Fourth, I believe that any man without principles, that he is ready and willing to die for any given moment, is already dead and is of no use or consequence whatsoever. William Cooper, August 3rd, 1990, from Camp Verde, Arizona. I want to read that last one again, though. Fourth, I believe that any man without principles, that he is ready and willing to die for at any given moment, is already dead and is of no use or consequence whatsoever. There's an awful lot of men and women out there without principles. And we've seen they're ready and willing to do just about anything to our cities and our people at any given moment. So maybe they are already dead and no use or consequence. We got to get past them. We got to get past the noise of them. Pardon me. So this is the foreword. There is a black and white picture. It's a little blurry. It's William Cooper and his daughter, Dorothy. So let's see. Oh, other way. There. He's a good-looking guy, and you'll get to know him. He really does care, and yeah, he cares. He cared enough. He really did give his life for it. Behold, a pale ass, a jeweled ass. It's one of those with the sparkly butt. Oh, hi, Suzanne. Thank you. Just before I start reading the foreword, I had to catch myself with that the naughty word. I guess self deletion is okay on YouTube, but I'm not going to change the words. So if there's naughty words and YouTube decides to be angry and say I can't say the naughty words, I am streaming on Rumble as well. So feel free to go running over there because they're okay with the naughtier words. So, forward. The one thing that I find most difficult is to write about myself. It is hard to understand why some people thirst for knowledge about me. It was never my intention to be anyone's hero. I am certainly no great example upon which to base one's life. I consider myself a very average, normal kind of guy. I have some pretty good points. I have some human failings. I am proud of some of my achievements, and there are things that I wish I had not done. I'm not perfect, and I'm not sure that I ever want to be. But it is certain that I do not belong on anyone's pedestal. I am a man with a message, and the message will be accepted by only a few. To those few who will understand, I am your brother. Maybe we can change the future for the better. William Moore, in his disinformation publication entitled Focus, said that I am a fundamentalist preacher. 20 years ago, that would have been a compliment, but today it implies sleaziness. That is why he said it. I am not and have never been any kind of preacher. I am not starting a church. I am not developing a religion. I do not belong to any organizations. I do not have an entourage. There is no cult, and I am not a cult leader. No one camps out around my house. People have called radio talk shows claiming to have firsthand knowledge that I am a notorious radical right-wing extremist. Others have said they have proof that I belong to a white racist organization. Someone said they found my name on a list of Communist Party members. A man in Los Angeles, always the same voice, calls when I am on radio claiming that I am an alcoholic. The truth is, most of my close friends and acquaintances consider themselves to be liberal Democrats. My only political stance is constitutional. My wife is Chinese, so that rules out racist propaganda. I fought the communists in Vietnam. I will fight them again if necessary, but only on United States soil. I used to drink a lot of alcohol in my younger days. As I became older, the booze dwindled to a trickle. Now I do not drink much at all. Most of my friends have never seen me take a drink. Annie and I are fond of using wine in our cooking. The lies, no doubt, will continue. For the purpose of keeping everything in perspective, let's all understand that attempts to assassinate my character will continue and in all probability will become worse. Rather than let that get in the way, I want you to believe everything that you have ever heard about me. See if it changes anything that I've been trying to tell you. See if it negates any of the proof. I believe that is the easiest way to handle those attacks. You who are sincerely interested in knowing will seek out me or those who are intimately close to me. Those who do are the only ones who will ever really know who and what I am. My ancestors came from England, Scotland, and Ireland. I had relatives who fought on both sides of the Civil War, and some who fought in the Indian Wars. One of my ancestors was a horse thief in Texas. I don't know for sure, but I think he got hung for it. When I was a little boy, I heard whispers that there was some Cherokee blood in the family. Every time I asked about it, I was told to shut up. I never could figure out why everyone was afraid to talk about the Indian blood. I thought, and still think, that is something of which to be proud. I have since discovered that the old folks in my family, like the old folks in almost every family, thought there was some stigma attached to being part Indian. In the old days on the American frontier, people lived by hard rules. If you weren't accepted by your neighbors, you were more than likely to end up dead. My paternal grandmother's family, named Vance, traveled to Texas in a covered wagon and were some of the first settlers in the area of Odessa. My great grandfather Vance was a real cowboy who eventually became one of the first oil field workers. My great grandmother Vance told me that one of their first homes was a dugout on the prairie. My great aunt's sister owned a photo of her father, my great grandfather Vance, standing in front of a saloon beside his friend. Both men had 6 guns stuck in their belts. When she was about 84 or so, she told me that my great grandfather Vance had gone off to do some work for a rancher. It was during a particularly nasty Indian uprising. My great grandmother was a newly married young woman at the time. She rose early one morning and saw smoke rising from the direction of one of her neighbors. Soon, a war party of 5 young braves rode up to her dugout. She told me she was scared to death, but knew if she showed it, they would kill her for sure. The Indians were hungry. Great Grandma Vance made them get down off their ponies, dragged them inside, and fed them. They didn't harm her. After filling their stomachs, they rode off in the direction where she saw smoke rising later that afternoon. She said that she learned later that she was the only one in the area that had not been burned out or killed. She was a very brave woman. Great Grandma Vance died in a car accident just a short time after telling me that story. I thought it was a very strange way for her to die. She went from covered wagons to Fords to Boeing 707s. Grandma Vance saw just about everything that ever was important in this world happen in her lifetime. My paternal grandfather's family also rode across the country in a covered wagon. They strayed a little north, however, and ended up in the Indian Territory now known as Oklahoma. They were on the front line during the Oklahoma land rush and succeeded in staking out 320 acres on Big Bear Creek near what would eventually become Enid. A little town sprang up not too far away called Garber. They raised lots of kids. I remember my great-grandmother cooking the biggest breakfast I had ever seen. We slept in real feather beds that swallowed us up. We ran to the outhouse in the middle of the night because we were embarrassed to use the chamber pot that great-grandma kept handy under every bed. In the morning, everyone would crowd around the warm stove and the wood stove in the kitchen or the coal stove in the parlor, trying to get warm. My dad had given me a .22 rifle for Christmas, and great-grandma's farm was the first place that I ever went hunting. I got up before the sun one morning, tiptoed downstairs, and headed out to the creek. About 2 hours later, I saw my chance and shot a quail sitting up in a tree. I strutted proudly to the farmhouse, holding that quail up for all to see. Luckily, the farmhand saw me first. He burst out laughing and asked me what I thought I was doing with that sparrow. I ran off and buried that bird and never said a word to anyone. I learned later that quails don't sit in trees. For those who may think this to be a terrible thing, I must tell you that every boy in those days was given a rifle and taught to hunt. During hunting season, many a family managed to put aside some extra money because the boys brought home meat from the hunt. That money saved was sorely needed. It was considered a duty for a citizen to own a gun in order to carry out the intent of the Second Amendment to the Constitution. That's interesting. It was considered a duty for a citizen to own a gun in order to carry out the intent of the Second Amendment to the Constitution. As long as the citizens owned guns, the government could never become oppressive. My mother's family came from Scotland and settled in North Carolina. They were hardworking and thrifty folk. Most of them were poor. I never knew much more about my mother's family. I don't even remember anyone talking much about them. I know that my grandmother, Nellie Woodside, was forced to give up some of her children when her husband died. There was not enough money to feed all the kids. My mother was one of those chosen to live in a children's home until things got better. No one ever talked about my mother's father. When I asked about my grandfather, I was told, Red, sorry, Red was no good, and you just mind your own business. I got the feeling that nobody liked him. He died before I entered this world. I was born May 6, 1943. I was reared in a military family. My father is USAF Lieutenant Colonel retired Milton V. Cooper. He prefers to be called Jack, a nickname given to him by the family when he was a boy. Dad began his Air Force career as a young cadet flying biplanes and retired as a command pilot with thousands of hours to his credit. I have a picture of him standing in front of an old biplane in his leather jacket and his cap with the ear flaps just like Snoopy wears. This is Bill Cooper's mother and father. So they're looking like a nice, happy couple. Usually in that era, most people are scowling, so the fact that they're both kind of smiling is nice. I can remember the pilots gathered around the kitchen table, talking about the planes and telling stories. Sometimes they discussed strange things called Foo Fighters or UFOs. When we were lucky, they got out the projector and showed Kodachrome slides. That was a special treat. By the time I was 8 years old, I think I had already seen and been inside every plane the Air Force, which used to be the Army Air Force, had ever owned. I had flown in several. I had seen many of them crash and had friends who had lost their fathers. I remember one night in the Azores at Lagays Field. We were at the base theater watching a movie when the projector ground to a stop, the lights came on, and a plea was made for blood donors. We knew there had been a disaster. Everyone went outside and looked down the hill at the flight line. It was literally consumed in flames. We could see men on fire running through the night. A B-29 had crashed. I forget if it had been taking off or landing, but I will never forget the scene that was spread before me on that night. No one went back to the movie, even though it had only been half. Oh, sorry, I'm reading two lines at once. No one went back to the movie, even though we had only seen half. I was 9 years old, but felt much older. I'd seen many crashes, and I would see many more in the years to come. But I never seen anything that could ever compare to the wreckage, the fire, the devastation, or the loss of life caused by the crash of that B-29. We left the Azores a year later. As we climbed into the sky, I looked out the plane window. I could still see pieces of the wreckage where it had been pushed away from the runways. It was that incident that gave me an appreciation of the dangers that my dad faced on a daily basis. I knew then how lucky we were to see him walk in the door. Aviation wasn't safe in those days, especially for military pilots. We all knew families that had lost someone in a crash. I didn't always love my father. He was a strict disciplinarian. My dad did not believe in spare the rod, and his belt was put to use frequently in our family. I was a very sensitive but willful child. Rules didn't mean much to me until I got caught breaking them. Many times I was the focus of his anger. Like most kids, I didn't understand. I thought he was a tyrant. Now I appreciate his upbringing. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that without his strict discipline, we most probably would have turned out bad. Now I love my dad. He is my friend. He's an independent, gregarious, feisty, tough, confident, adventurous, sometimes overbearing, handsome, big bear of a man. My mother told me she fell in love with him because he looks like John Wayne, and he does. I have watched him progress from one who disdained any public show of affection to a man who is just as likely to hug you as shake your hand. On the other side, he has at times made me so angry I could have punched him in the mouth, but I never have. It's damned hard for anyone not to like him. He is always up to some mischief, and I can guarantee you that no one is ever bored around my father. My mother is a real Southern lady. They used to call her kind a Southern belle. She's one of the last of a dying breed. Dovey Nell, née Woodside Cooper, is the type of woman that men like to dream about when they're lonely. She is the kindest, gentlest woman that I have ever known. I do not make that statement just because I need water. You can tell he's a really good guy and he loves his people. So my mother is a real Southern lady. They used to call her kind a Southern belle. She is one of the last of a dying breed. Dovey Nell, née Woodside Cooper, is the type of woman that men like to dream about when they're lonely. She is the kindest, gentlest woman I have ever known, and I do not make that statement just because she is my mother. It's true. She was beautiful as a young woman, and she is beautiful now. My mother is one of those people who, once she likes you, cannot be driven away. She is loyal to a fault. I have seen her during the good and during the bad times. She never flinched no matter what. It always surprised me that she could be so tough, yet so kind, gentle, and loving all at the same time. Woe to anyone who ever harms my dad or one of her children in her presence. She is the best cook who ever stepped foot in any kitchen that was ever built. I love my mother probably more than anyone else in this world. I have a brother Ronnie and a sister Connie. They are fraternal twins, 2 years younger than me. We were closer than most siblings when we were children because we spent so much of our life in foreign countries, where oftentimes we found ourselves unable to communicate except with each other. We had school friends, but school was often many miles from where we lived. We had few toys. Most of them were things that mother gave us, such as spools, cigar boxes, string, or anything else that we could find to keep us occupied. Every Christmas was a delight because we always got some real toys. Ronnie and I had a propensity to see how things worked. However, we had a propensity to see how things worked, however, so they never lasted long. Everything we wore, including shoes, was ordered from the Sears catalog. It was the wish book, and we never tired of looking through it. We alternately loved each other, hated each other, fought each other, and defended each other, as I guess all kids do. Ronnie, his wife Susie, and their daughter Jennifer live in Garber, Oklahoma, where Ron sells John Deere farm equipment. Ron and Susie built their house with their own hands. As far as I know, they intend to live in that house until they die. Ronnie served as an officer in the Army. In Vietnam, he earned the Silver Star. We haven't seen each other since 1976, after he came to visit me in the hospital after I lost my leg. Nevertheless, I love him and I miss him a lot. Neither one of us can afford to travel much unless it's business, but one of these days soon I'm going to surprise him with a visit. Connie has shown me pictures that Ron looks just like my great-grandfather. Almost every picture I've seen shows Ron in chaps, Stetson, boots, and either near or on a horse. I guess that is about how it should be, as Ronnie always wanted to be a cowboy when he was a child. Connie has really turned out to be a fine woman. When she was little, I sometimes liked her and sometimes didn't. Little boys don't usually have much use for little girls. Since we only had each other to play with, however, Ronnie and I loved her a lot. But little boys just can't ever admit anything like that. I remember Connie always followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't get rid of her no matter how hard I tried. Her devotion and loyalty made me love her all the more. Of course, I pretended that she was a pain in the ass. As we grew older and began to realize that there was a really big difference between boys and girls, Connie began to take on an air of mystery. From that time until I was about 18, she baffled me completely. I remember when she was around 13 or so, she would throw temper tantrums when she got angry. She would stomp her feet, scream, run to her room, and slam the door. Ronnie and I thought it was a great show, but couldn't for love or money understand why she did it. When we asked Mom, she would just shake her head and say, hormones. And there's the three kids that way. Connie grew up to be a beautiful woman and eventually married her high school sweetheart, Gus Deaton. They had two beautiful children, Janice and Chrissy. Janice is very much like Connie, loving and loyal. Chrissy is different. She's a redhead who loves to party. I guess Chrissy represents a freedom of spirit more than anything else. Connie's marriage deteriorated and no one could figure out what was happening until Gus was diagnosed as having brain tumors. It was tragic. Everyone really loved Gus. As his disease progressed, he began to do crazy things. People just drifted away. I have always nurtured a very special love for Chrissy. She never deserted her father. When no one else could stand to be around him, Chrissy chose to go and live with them. So he wasn't lonely, she said. Even now, I get all choked up when I think of that little red-headed girl going to live with her sick father so he won't be lonely. His behavior was such that no one else could stand to be around him. At least, that's what I'm told. It wasn't Gus's fault that he became ill, and I've always felt it just wasn't fair to Connie, the children, or Gus. I've since learned that life is seldom fair. Connie eventually remarried and moved to Austin, Texas, where she has established herself as a valuable employee of a large bank. Her husband is an executive for McGraw-Hill. His name, coincidentally, is Ron. We all really like Ron McClure, especially Dad, who had formed a close relationship with him. My sister really blossomed into a wonderful woman. She has become one of my dearest and closest friends. She has grown to be so much a part of me that even now I sometimes get a feeling to look behind me to see if that little girl is still there. I feel a great loss when I see that it's only Sugar Bear, my faithful dog, but then I love him too, so I can't complain. I graduated in 1961 from Yamato High School in Japan. That fall, I enlisted in the Air Force. I really wanted to go into the Navy, but I had always had a tendency towards car sickness and seasickness. I attended basic at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas, and Technical School for Aircraft and Missile Hydraulics. Okay. I should have maybe read that first. It's like hydraulics, but it's PNEU. So hydraulics at Amarillo Air Force Base. Upon completion, I was ordered to the 495th Bomb Wing of the Strategic Air Command at Shepherd Air Force Base, just outside Wichita Falls. The name was later changed to the 4,245th Bomb Wing. Don't ask me why. In just a short time, I had gone from a skinny kid who didn't know much about anything, even though I thought I did, to an airman who had a secret security clearance and worked B-52 bombers, KC-135 refueling aircraft, and Minuteman missiles. I saw real atomic bombs. I worked around them on a daily basis. Because of that, I had to wear a dosimeter just in case I was exposed to radiation. In those days, we were the elite of the Air Force, and we knew it. I received a letter of commendation for my work. In due time, I was awarded the National Defense Medal and the Air Force Good Conduct Medal. Actually, I think everyone was awarded the National Defense Medal so that no one would be embarrassed standing in formation with nothing on their chest. It was during this time that I met a couple of sergeants who kind of adopted me. We went out to the clubs together and usually ended up chasing women and drinking a lot of beer. They told me several stories about being attached to a special unit that recovered crashed flying saucers. Sergeant Meese told me that he had been on one operation that transported a saucer so large that a special team went before them, lowering all telephone poles and fence posts. Another team followed and replaced them. They moved it only at night, and it was kept parked and covered somewhere off the road during the day. Since we were always half tanked when these stories came out, I never believed them. Sergeants were known to tell some tall tales to younger guys like me. On November 22nd, 1963, I was on duty at CQ, or Charge of Quarters, for the Field Maintenance Squadron. Most of the men were out on the flight line working. The barracks orderlies had been assigned their tasks. The first sergeant had gone somewhere, and I was alone. I turned on the orderly room TV to watch the live broadcast of the President's motorcade in Dallas. I was not prepared for what I saw. I stared in disbelief as the events unfurled in front of my eyes. I knew that something had happened, but what? I had seen and heard the assassination, but my mind was not accepting it. I kept staring at the set to discover what it was that had happened when slowly the realization crept over me. A numbness spread up my arms and legs. I saw what had happened. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and a chill went down my spine. President Kennedy had been shot right in front of my eyes. At that point, huge tears began to stream down my face. Waves of emotion rushed through my body. I felt that I had to do something, so I picked up the direct line to the command center. I choked back the tears. When the command duty officer answered, I told him that the president had just been shot in Dallas. There was a pause, and he asked me, "How do you know that he's been shot?" I told him I had watched it on television, and then I hung up the phone. I was numb all over. A few minutes later, the command duty officer called back and ordered a red alert at DEFCON 2. Defense Condition 2 meant war was imminent. The roar of jet engines could already be heard, and as the alert crews taxied their planes toward the runway, I was scared shitless as I ran from the barracks to barracks, routing out the night shift and those who had the day off. We had been told that we had about 15 minutes to launch all of our planes before the first atomic bomb would hit us in the event that the Russians launched an attack. I didn't even lock up the orderly room. I just jumped in the first car I saw, rode to the SAC compound, and reported to my red alert duty station. For the next 3 days, I slept under the belly of a B-52 bomber, staring at the Armageddon that hid just inside the closed bomb bay doors. We thought the shit had finally hit the fan. It was a great relief when the alert was ended. I left the Air Force with an honorable discharge in 1965. In December the same year, I joined the Navy. I had always loved the ocean. I had wanted to be a sailor since I was a little boy. Seasick or not, I made up my mind to follow my dream. I was sent to the Naval Training Center in San Diego for boot camp. Because of my prior Air Force experience, I was made the recruit chief company commander. I was allowed to keep my same rank and pay grade. We had a good bunch of guys in my company, and we had a great company commander, Chief Campbell, chief electrician's mate. He turned the company over to me. The chief was a good man. He was only interested in teaching us what we needed to know and in keeping us out of trouble. Unlike most boot camp instructors, Chief Campbell had no axe to grind and wasn't trying to prove anything to himself or anyone else. He truly was our friend. During boot camp, I volunteered for submarines. My sense of adventure was very strong. I was accepted, and upon completion of basic training, was ordered to the USS Tiru, SS 416, at the submarine base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Spitfire and damnation, no one could possibly be that lucky. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read my orders. Here I was, fulfilling my dream of being in the Navy. I got exactly what I asked for the first time that I asked for it, which was extremely rare in any branch of military service. And to top it all off, I was being sent to Hawaii, the land of tropical paradise. I was in seventh heaven. I landed in Hawaii with no time to play and took a cab directly to the sub base. My submarine was nowhere to be found. I kept asking people until I found someone who told me that my boat, subs are called boats in the Navy, was not at the sub base but in dry dock in the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. So I hailed another cab. The cab driver dropped me off at the head of a pier that looked like it had never been cleaned up after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was covered with what appeared to be hoses, huge electrical cables, rusting metal of every conceivable size, shape that you can imagine. The air was rank with the smell of diesel, welding fumes, paint, and steel. If there is a hell on earth, I thought, this has to be it. I walked up the pier, over the edge, and looked down into the dry dock. There, stripped of all dignity, lying naked and cut cleanly in half, was my boat, the USS Tiru. Men were scrambling all over it. They looked like ants swarming over a dead grasshopper. Brilliant flashes of life, brighter than the sun, drove sparks high into the air and then down into a beautiful flow to the bottom of the dock. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone actually expected me to go out to sea, then underwater, in what appeared to me to be a motley collection of cut-up rusting metal scavenged from some satanic junkyard, stuck together by demons with welding torches. My luck had just run out. I reported to the barracks barge, moored in the water on the other side of the pier, and was given a hammock for when I had the duty. Then I was sent to the sub-base barracks, where I was assigned a rack and a locker. I wanted to go into Honolulu, but quickly discovered non-quals did not rate Liberty. It was getting worse. The next few months were spent sanding, painting, lifting, learning the boat. The men of the crew, except for the chief cook, were great. The chief cook was a drunk every minute of every day and night. He didn't like me, so I didn't get much to eat. His dislike stemmed from my first morning when I walked into the galley and watched as other crew members ordered their breakfast. When there was an opening, I stepped up and asked for eggs over easy. That's when the chief hit the overhead and vowed I would never eat a meal in his mess decks. He wasn't kidding either. The only time after that morning that I got anything to eat out of that galley was when the chief cook was ashore. To this day, I still don't know what I did wrong. I could have gone to the captain, but if I had done that, I might as well have put in for a transfer at the same time. It wasn't long, though, before I was able to locate where he hid his booze. I made his life miserable from that moment on. I won't tell you what I laced his vodka with, but it wasn't anything you'd ever want to drink, believe me. I kept that chief so sick that he was transferred off the boat for medical reasons. I didn't want to hurt him, but it was either get rid of him or starve to death. I made up my mind that chief or no chief, I wasn't going to go to sea on a boat that wouldn't feed me. I didn't relish going to sea with a drunk chief in charge of closing the main induction valve when the boat made a dive. When a submarine goes underwater, certain valves must be closed or the boat will flood with water and everyone will drown. The main induction is the most important of those valves. It was the cook's duty to close it because the valve was in the galley on board the USS Tiru. I made two especially close friends while on the Tiru, a black seaman named Lincoln Loving, an American Indian seaman called Geronimo. The three of us were inseparable. Lincoln was best man at my first marriage. Of the three, Geronimo was the most experienced seaman, so he taught Lincoln and me. He knew everything there was to know about the boat, rope, paint, and a whole lot of other things that a man had to know to survive in the Navy. I knew the most about getting along in the military, so I taught Geronimo and Lincoln. Lincoln knew every really good spot on the island where we could have a good time, so he led the Liberty Party. Three things really stand out in my mind about the time I spent on the Tiru. The first was an incident that occurred during a test dive while we were creeping along at about 3 or 4 knots at a depth of 600 feet off the island of Oahu. Lincoln and I had just been relieved from watch and were in the after battery talking when we were knocked off our feet. We heard a loud clang forward and felt the boat lunge to port. Then we heard a sound that made our blood run cold. I could literally feel the blood drain from my face as I listened to whatever it was that we hit scrape along the starboard side of the hull. Lincoln and I froze. We held our breath as metal screeched upon metal. I thought it would never end. No one moved anywhere. Finally, after what seemed a lifetime, the boat lurched and the noise disappeared aft. If it had pierced the hull, none of us would be alive today. We never found out what it was. When we returned to Pearl, divers went down to have a look. When they surfaced, they reported that the starboard bowplane was damaged and the hull was gouged all along the starboard side from bow to stern. We went in for repairs. In a couple of days, we were good as new, but I certainly had an entirely different perspective on life. The second thing that stands out happened to another boat that had been out participating in torpedo attack exercises with another submarine. I remember seeing the boat enter the harbor with a large tarp over the conning tower. I could see something holding the tarp up on each side of the tower, but I couldn't see what it was. Later, Geronimo, Lincoln, and I walked over to where the boat was berthed and looked under the tarp. The other boat in the exercise had scored a direct hit. What we saw was a torpedo sticking completely through the sail. We started laughing. Then we all looked at each other and decided it wasn't so funny after all. The submarine business was not quite as attractive as I'd thought. Number 3 happened during a transit between Portland, Seattle area and Pearl Harbor. I was the port lookout during the afternoon watch, 1200 hours to 1600 hours. Geronimo was the starboard lookout. Ensign Ball was the OOD, the officer of the deck. We were doing 10 knots on the surface, and the 3 of us were on the bridge in the conning tower. It was a bright day, but the sun was obscured by a low layer of clouds. It was cool. We had a bit of fun where someone below requested permission to put a man on deck forward to get something that was needed from the waterproof deck locker. The locker was under the deck plate, all the way up on the bow near the forward torpedo room escape trunk. Geronimo and I laughed when Ensign Ball gave his approval. He really shouldn't have, because we were running a pressure wave over the bow. When we saw who it was they had sent on deck, we roared with laughter. We looked down over the side of the sail at the deck level door just as it popped open, and Seaman Lincoln, Loving, stuck his head out. He didn't look happy. Lincoln reached down and put the runner in the safety track in the deck, fastened the safety belt around his waist, and grabbing the handrail, stepped out on deck. He looked up at us with that "don't you laugh at me" look that he did so well. It took him a few minutes to get up the nerve to let go of the handrail and begin to make his way forward against the wind and the pitching deck. Gingerly, he crept forward until he was just at the point where the pressure wave was rolling off the deck when the bow heaved free of the water on its cyclical upswing. I could see that Lincoln was trying to time a run forward when the bow was out of the water. He made a couple false starts, then ran slipping on the wet deck, disappearing into the access hole for the forward torpedo room escape hatch. The bow plunged underwater, and I found myself sucking air as I imagined the cold salt water swirling around me. It wasn't me, though, it was Lincoln. I grabbed the top of the sail as I waited for the bow to swing up, hoping Lincoln wouldn't panic. What we saw next could have been a clip from one of those old Keystone Cop movies. Lincoln was flailing water so hard that it looked like he had 40 arms and 40 legs. It was only then that I realized that Lincoln had joined the Navy, but he didn't know how to swim. When he finds When he finally gathered a foothold, the half-drowned seaman exploded up out of that hole like a Polaris missile and ran back to the conning tower just as fast as his wet leather soles would carry him. Ensign Ball, Geronimo, and I laughed for a good 10 minutes. In fact, every time we saw Lincoln for the next 2 days, we would burst out laughing. Lincoln didn't think it was funny and didn't miss a chance to slug at us every time we laughed. Lincoln went below. Geronimo and I began the unending task of sweeping the horizon from bow to stern, from the sky to the horizon to the zenith, then back to the horizon, from bow to stern, again and again and again, and then pause to rest our eyes and chat for a few minutes. I asked Ensign Ball to call for some hot coffee. As he bent over the 1MC, I turned, raising my binoculars to my eyes just in time to see a huge disc rise up from beneath the ocean water streaming from the air around it, tumbling lazily on its axis, and disappear into the clouds. My heart beat wildly. I tried to talk but couldn't. Then I changed my mind and decided I didn't want to say that anyways. I had seen a flying saucer the size of an aircraft carrier come right out of the ocean and fly into the clouds. I looked around quickly to see if anyone else had seen it. Ensign Ball was still bending over the 1MC. He was ordering coffee. Geronimo was looking down the starboard side aft. I was torn between my duty to report what I had seen and the knowledge that if I did, no one would believe me. As I looked out over the ocean, I saw only sky, clouds, and water. It was as if nothing had happened. I almost thought I'd dreamed it. Ensign Ball straightened, turned toward Geronimo, and said the coffee was on the way up. I looked back towards the spot, about 15 degrees relative off the port bow, and about 2.5 nautical miles distant. Nothing. Not even a hint of what had happened. Ensign Ball, I said, I thought I saw something about 15 degrees relative off bow, but I lost it. Can you help me look over that area? Ensign Ball turned, raising his glasses to eye level. I didn't know it at the time, but Geronimo had heard me and turned to look. He was happy that something had broken the monotony. I was just lifting the binoculars off my chest when I saw it. The giant saucer shape plunged out of the clouds, tumbled, and pushing the water before it, opened a hole in the ocean and disappeared from view. It was incredible. This time I had seen it with my naked eyes, and its size in comparison with the total view was nothing short of astounding. Ensign Ball stood in shock, his binoculars in his hands, his mouth open. Geronimo yelled, "Holy shit! What the? Hey, did you guys see that?" Ensign Ball turned and looked right at me with the most incredulous look on his face. He said in a low voice, "This had to happen on my watch." He turned, quickly pressing the override on the 1MC, and yelled, "Captain to the bridge, captain to the bridge." As an afterthought, he pressed the switch again and yelled, "Somebody get a camera up here." The captain surged up the ladder with the quartermaster on his heels. Chief Quartermaster Quintero had the ship's 35mm camera slung around his neck. The captain stood patiently while Ensign Ball tried to describe what he had seen. He glanced at us, and we both nodded in affirmation. That was not enough. That was not enough for the captain. He called sonar, who during the excitement had reported contact underwater on the same bearing. The captain announced on the 1MC, "This is the captain. I have the con." The reply came back instantly from the helm, "Aye, aye, sir." I knew that the helmsman was passing the word in the control room that the captain had personally taken control of the boat. I also knew that rumors were probably flying through the vessel. The captain called down and ordered someone to closely monitor the radar. His command was instantly acknowledged. As the 5 of us stood gazing out over the sea, the same ship, or one exactly like it, rose slowly, turned in the air, tilted at an angle, and then vanished. I saw the chief snapping pictures out of the corner of my eye. This time, I had 3 images from which to draw conclusions. It was a metal machine. Of that, there was no doubt whatsoever. It was intelligently controlled. Of that, I was equally sure. It was a dull color, kind of like pewter. There were no lights. There was no glow. I thought I had seen a row of what looked like portholes, but could not be certain. Radar reported contact at the same bearing and gave us a range of 3 nautical miles. The range was right on as the craft had moved towards the general direction that we were headed. We watched repeatedly as the strange craft re-entered the water, then subsequently rose into the clouds over and over again until finally we knew it was gone for good. The episode lasted about 10 minutes. Before leaving the bridge, the captain took the camera from the chief and instructed each of us not to talk to anyone but what we had seen. He told us the incident was classified and we were not to discuss it, not even amongst ourselves. We acknowledged his order. The captain and the chief left the bridge. Ensign Ball stepped to the 1MC and, pressing the override switch, announced, "This is Ensign Ball. The captain has left the bridge. I have the con." The reply, "Aye, aye, sir," quickly followed. Those of us who had witnessed the UFO were not allowed to go ashore after we had berthed in Pearl. Even those of us who didn't have the duty were told we had to stay aboard. After about 2 hours, the commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence boarded. He went directly to the captain's stateroom. It wasn't long before we were called to wait in the passageway outside the captain's door. Ensign Ball called in first. After about 10 minutes, he came out and went into the wardroom. He looked shaken, and I was next. When I entered the stateroom, the commander was holding my service record in his hands. He wanted to know why I had gone from the Air Force into the Navy. I told him the whole story, and he laughed when I said that after putting off the Navy for fear of chronic seasickness, I hadn't been seasick yet. Suddenly, a mask dropped over his face, looking at me directly in my eyes, and he asked, "What did you see out there?" "I believe it was a flying saucer, sir." The man began to visibly shake, and he screamed obscenities at me. He threatened to put me in the brig for the rest of my life. I thought he wasn't going to stop yelling, but as suddenly as he began, he stopped. I was confused. I had just answered his question truthfully, yet I was threatened with prison. I was not afraid, but I was not very confident either. I figured I'd better take another tack. 18 years with my father and 4 years in the Air Force had taught me something. Number one was that officers just do not lose control like that, ever. Number two was that if my answer elicited that explosion, then the next thing to come out of my mouth had better be something entirely different. Number three was that his response had been an act of kindness to get me to arrive at exactly that conclusion. "Let's start all over again," he said. "What did you see out there?" "Nothing, sir," I answered. "I didn't see a damn thing, and I'd like to get out of here just as soon as possible." A smile spread over his face, and the captain looked relieved. "Are you sure, Cooper?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "I'm sure." "You're a good sailor, Cooper," he said. "The Navy needs men like you. You'll go far with the Navy." He then asked me to read several pieces of paper that all said the same thing, only with different words. I read that if I ever talked about what it was that I didn't see, I could be fined up to $10,000 and imprisoned for up to 10 years, or both. In addition, I could lose all pay and allowances due or ever to become due. He asked me to sign a piece of paper stating that I understood the laws and regulations that I had just read governing the safeguard of classified information relating to the national security. By signing, I agreed never to communicate in any manner any information regarding the incident with anyone. I was dismissed, and boy, was I glad to get out of there. Not long after that incident, I devolunteered from submarines. I was transferred to the USS Tom Bigby, AOG-11. The Tom Bigby was a gasoline tanker. It was more dangerous than the sub. The captain was crazy and the crew was a combination of idiots and misfits. I once had to draw my pistol while I was petty officer of the watch to prevent an officer from being attacked by a seaman. The Tom Bigby collided in the dead of night with a destroyer in the Molokai Channel, and several men died when the destroyer was almost cut in half. Every day aboard that ship was exactly like a scene right out of Mr. Roberts. I struck for quartermaster, which is navigation specialist, and managed to advance to the rank of second-class petty officer, despite the obvious obstacles. I made 2 Westpac tours aboard the Tom Bigby. They included a total of 12 months off the coast of Vietnam. We came under machine gun fire while anchored off of Chu Lai. We had to do an emergency breakaway and leave the harbor. All we needed was one tracer round in one of the tanks, and kaboom, it would have been all over. The Viet Cong gunner probably got busted because the stupid jerk missed the whole damn ship. How can you miss a whole damn ship? The only other time I felt threatened was when we went up to a small outpost at the DMZ called Qua Viet. It was a vision right out of hell. Qua Viet sat on the southern bank at the river mouth of the Thakan River. We rode at anchor and pumped fuel ashore through the bottom ley line. Every night, we could see the tracers from firefights raging up and down the river and all along the DMZ. It was a real hot spot. Every once in a while, Viet Cong or an NVA rockets would slam into the camp. We would perform an emergency breakaway, pull out to sea until the all clear was sounded. Everything was cool until our wacko captain decided we were going into the river mouth. Did you ever try to put a pencil through the eye of a needle? That's about comparable to what we did. I'll never know how we got that big ship through the narrow mouth of that river with no navigational references whatsoever. We dropped anchor mid-channel and the captain backed the ship right up to the beach and dropped the stern anchor out into the sand. There we sat, a great big target full of gasoline. We were helpless in the mouth of the narrow river with 3 anchors out, right in the middle of one of the hottest combat zones in Vietnam. That night, several men in the crew wrote letters to the Chief of Naval Operations requesting an immediate transfer. No one slept. I don't know why the enemy didn't send in the rockets, but they didn't. I knew then that God must have kept special watch over fools. The next day, we set to sea and started for Pearl. The captain was relieved for incompetence later that year, and then I was transferred to school. I didn't know what school I'd drawn. Turned out to be the Naval Security and Intelligence School for Internal Security Specialists, NEC 9545. The general training prepared me to set up security perimeters, secure installations and buildings, and safeguard classified information. My training included special weapons, booby trap identification and disarmament, the detection of bugs, phone taps, transmitters, and many other subjects. I was specifically trained to prepare and conduct Pacific Area intelligence briefings. From the day I reported to school in 1968 until I left the Navy, I worked off and on for naval security and intelligence. Upon graduating, I was transferred to Vietnam. I had volunteered over a year before because I figured that my chances were better in the war than they were on that screwed up gasoline tanker. Sorry. I'll try that again. I had volunteered over a year before because I figured that my chances were better in the war than they were on that screwed up gasoline tanker. This was the first good news I'd had since leaving boot camp. I really wanted to fight for my country. I wasn't to find out what a real fool I was until a few years later. I landed in Da Nang and was bused to Camp Carter, the headquarters for Naval Security and Intelligence in I Corps. I was interviewed by Captain Carter, the commanding officer. The names turned out to be a coincidence. Captain Carter asked me if I thought I would make a good patrol boat captain. I told him that I would. What else could I tell him? I thought he was joking when he told me I would have command of a boat and crew. He wasn't, and I did. Lieutenant Dewey at the Harbor Patrol, a division of Naval Intelligence, allowed me to handpick a crew. He gave me first choice of 4 45-foot picket boats that had just been unloaded from the deck of a freighter. I and my new crew spent 3 days going over every inch of that boat. We adjusted and fine-tuned everything. We sanded and painted. One of the seamen even hung curtains in the after cabin. We checked and double-checked the engines. My gunner's mate, GMG-3 Robert G. Barron, checked out weapons, and we began to arm our vessel. I've got to tell you the truth. Just looking at all those guns scared the shit out of me. I vowed right then and there that I would be the best damn captain that ever commanded a combat vessel in wartime. I learned to exist on only 2 to 3 hours of sleep out of 24, and never ate until I knew that my crew had been fed. We spent a lot of spooky nights patrolling the Da Nang harbor and river. One night, a rocket hit the ammo dump at the river's edge near the Da Nang bridge, and it really looked as if the world was coming to an end. Another time, we engaged the enemy in the cove at Point Isabella near the marine fuel farm and probably saved their butts. That encampment was reported in the Stars and Stripes, the Armed Forces newspaper in Vietnam. The worst moments came, however, not from Charlie, but from Mother Nature. A full-blown typhoon roared across the Gulf of Tonkin. To save the boats, we put to sea. The angels must have been laughing. What a sight we must have made. I maneuvered our boat in between 2 giant cargo ships riding at anchor off Red Beach and learned quickly what fear was really all about. The wind was blowing so hard that none of us could go on deck. That meant that 2 of us in the pilot house were stuck on watch, and the men trapped in the after cabin had to man the hand pumps. The windows in the pilot house blew out, and the rain fell like knives hitting our skin. Water poured in, and I prayed that the men on the pumps would not become exhausted. I could just barely make out the 2 tankers. I could tell they were in more trouble than we. When we were on the crest of the mountainous waves, we looked down onto the top of the shifts. When we were in the trough, we seemed to be in danger of their crashing down upon us. One of the freighters snapped a cable and steamed slowly out of the harbor. The next morning, the storm calmed, and we moved into the river. Debris was floating down, and we had to play dodge the tree trunks until we spotted a sheltered pier in front of the press club. We carefully pulled the boat alongside, tied fast to the pier, then collapsed from exhaustion. After a while, we drew straws to see who would remain on watch with me. The rest went into the press club. After a couple hours, the crew returned and we went in. It was like nothing was going on outside. Reporters sat around drinking and eating. All around flowed conversation and laughter. We ordered a huge meal, signed Lieutenant Dewey's name to the check, then went out to the boat. I don't know whose name the other guys signed, but none of us had any money. I didn't even know if Lieutenant Dewey ever got the bill. I do know that it was one of the best damn meals that we ever had in that country. The next 2 days were spent in repairing the boat, cleaning the weapons, checking everything. Then we went to the club, got stone drunk, and slept for damn near the whole other day. Bob Barron volunteered for Quaviet. I begged him to stay with us. Maybe we could all go up later together, but he couldn't wait. He had to have action. We promised each other that if one of us bought the farm, the other would drink a bottle of scotch in memory, then break the bottle on the rocks. Don't ask me what that was all about. Men who think they might die at any given moment do stupid things, and I was no different than most. About 3 weeks later, we learned that Bob's boat had gone on 2 Lima patrol on the Tha Khan River one night and had never returned. No radio transmissions were ever heard, and for a while no bodies were found. Then one by one they popped to the surface along the bank. It was a long time before we ever found the boat, and when we did, it was twisted up like a pretzel. I say we because after I drank the bottle of scotch and broke it on the rocks, I forced the issue and was transferred to Dong Ha River Support at Quaviet. It was now a personal war. They had killed a part of me. Bob had been my friend. His name is on the Vietnam Memorial. My boat engaged the enemy more times than any other boat that ever patrolled that river. We kept the enemy off the river, and I never lost another man. I was awarded the Naval Achievement Medal with Combat 5, the Naval Commendation Medal with Combat 5, and the Combat Action Ribbon. Our whole organization was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the Naval Unit Citation, and each one of us accumulated various other minor awards, ribbons, and medals. One thing I didn't like about Vietnam was that it was very difficult to maintain unit cohesion and morale when you had proven and trusted men leaving all the time at the staggered intervals and green unproven men arriving to take their place. I noticed that I felt like I was deserting my crew when I rotated home. I tried to extend my tour of duty, but they had already decided to phase out our forces and turn the war over to the Vietnamese. If I had extended a month earlier, I was told I could have stayed. My attitude at that point was a smoldering screw it. The whole time that I was in Vietnam, especially on the DMZ, I had noticed there was a lot of UFO activity. We had individual 24-hour crypto code sheets that we used to encode messages. But because of the danger that one of them could be captured at any time, we used special code words for sensitive information. UFOs, I was told, were definitely sensitive information. I learned exactly how sensitive when all the people of an entire village disappeared after UFOs were seen hovering above their huts. I learned that both sides fired upon the UFOs, and they had blasted back with mysterious blue light. Rumors floated around that the UFOs had kidnapped and mutilated 2 Army soldiers, then dropped them in the bush. No one knew how much of this was true, but the fact that the rumors persisted made me tend to think that there was at least some truth. I found out later that most of the rumors were true. I eventually found myself back in Hawaii. This time it was shore duty at the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet at Makalapa, a hill above Pearl Harbor. I had carried a secret security clearance in the Air Force, and secret was required for submarines. When I checked into the Fleet Administration Unit, I was asked to fill out papers for another clearance. I did as I was asked. I remember that one of the questions asked if I had ever belonged to any fraternal organizations. I looked down the list, circled the Demole Society, and answered in the affirmative. I was assigned to the Operational Status Report Office, OPSTAT, under Lieutenant Commander Mercado, while I awaited the results of my FBI background check for the upgraded clearance. About 6 months later, I was called into the office of the Chief of Staff for Naval Intelligence. I was asked to read the regulations covering the Personnel Reliability Program governing those personnel who had access to nuclear weapons, information on nuclear weapons, launch codes, and various other things having to do with nuclear weapons or anything that came under HQCR 44. I was asked to read and then sign a security oath, which I did. I was then told by Captain Caldwell that my security clearance had been upgraded to top secret Q, sensitive compartmentalized information, with access authorized on a strict need-to-know basis. He told me to report to the officer in charge of the CINCPAC fleet, so CINCPAC Intelligence Briefing Team, the following morning at 0400 hours. I did. What I learned during that time I spent in that briefing team is what led me on my 18-year search that culminated in writing of this book. I was later given another upgraded clearance in the crypto category and served as the designated Spec Cat operator when I was on watch in the command center. On the day that I learned that the Office of Naval Intelligence had participated in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and that it was the Secret Service agent driving the limo that had shot Kennedy in the head, I went AWOL with no intention of ever returning. My good friend Bob Swan is the one who talked me into going back. Later, on June 1st, 1972, the eve of my wedding, I told Bob everything that I knew about the UFOs, Kennedy's assassination, the Navy, the secret government, the coming Ice Age, the alternatives 1, 2, and 3, Project Galileo, and the plan for the New World Order. I believe that it was all true then, and I believe it is all true now. I must warn you, however, that I have found evidence that the secret societies were planning as far back as 1917 to invent an artificial threat from outer space in order to bring humanity together in a one world government, which they call the New World Order. I am still searching for the truth. I firmly believe that this book is closer to that truth than anything ever previously written. I attempted to leak information to a reporter after my discharge. I was forced off a cliff by a black limo on the hills of Oakland. Two men got out and climbed down to where I lay covered in blood. One bent down and felt for my carotid pulse. The other asked if I was dead. The nearest man said no, but he'll die. And the other replied, good, then we don't have to do anything else. They climbed up and drove off. I succeeded in climbing up the bank where I waited until found. A month later, I was forced into another accident by the same limo. This time, I was to lose my leg. Two men visited me in the hospital. They only wanted to know if I would shut up or if the next time should be final. I told them that I would be a very good little boy and that they needn't worry about me anymore. Under my breath, I swore to spill the beans as soon as I could figure out how to do it without getting hurt again. It took 16 years, $27,000, a computer, a lot of envelopes, but now everyone knows. I went back to school after leaving the Navy and obtained a degree in photography. I served as the chief instructor of the Coastal School of Deep Sea Diving, the head of the Mixed Gas Deep Saturation Diving Department, and the underwater photography instructor at the College of Oceaneering, admissions representative for Airco Technical Institute, assistant director at Adelphi Business College, executive director at Adelphi Business College, national marketing coordinator of United Education and Software, executive director of Pacific Coastal Technical Institute, and executive director of National Technical College. I also owned and operated Absolute Image Gallery and Studio of Fine Art Photography. In the spring of 1988, I saw a magazine that made reference to a document discovered by the research team of Moore, Shandera, and Friedman that outlined the government's knowledge of a downed saucer, dead alien bodies, and an operation called Operation Majestic 12. I knew that Moore and Friedman were government agents, and the documents were a fraud. I had never heard of Shandera. I knew this because I had seen a list of agents who were to initiate a contingency plan called Majestic that would lead investigators off track when such a need arose. I decided that it was time for me to enter the arena and expose the cover-up and the disinformation. First, it was necessary to convince the known agents that I was just a kook who didn't really know anything. I prepared some bogus information, mixed it with some true information, passed it to Moore and Friedman through Jim Spicer, the operator of a computer BBS network called Paranet. Spicer was told that the information was to go only to Moore or Friedman. No one else was to see it. I wanted to buy time by convincing these agents to report me to their case officers as harmless, thus allowing me to get the real information out to the public. None of that information was intended to go to the public. Spicer turned out to be working with Moore, however, and posted the files on the computer networks. Spicer then went to Los Angeles, conferred with Moore for 3 days, returned, and barred me from the Paranet system. Friedman called and elicited my address, the name of my employer, and a lot of other personal information. I knew that I was being checked out through the intelligence network and played along. About 1 week after talking to Friedman, 2 Defense Investigative Service agents showed up to my house and confiscated all my floppy disks. Holy floppy disks. The only thing that prevented them from taking my computer was the fact that it was an XT with no hard drive. I knew that my plan had worked because they didn't take me. With the help of Annie and a few very close and trusted friends, I prepared the real information, as true and correct as I could remember, and together we did a mailing that, in total, cost me $27,000. We sent the packages to people all over the world. This is what prevented the government from arresting me or harming me. Any move by them would be interpreted as total confirmation of everything I had revealed. I also uploaded the information onto computer bulletin boards all across the nation. At the same time, I publicly stated that Moore, Shandera, and Friedman are government agents and that the Eisenhower briefing document is a fraud. I was attacked by everyone. They insisted that Moore, Shandera, and Friedman were above reproach. I resigned effective April 15th, 1989, from the college where I was the executive director after Jamie Shandera was seen poking around the grounds. That story is included later in this book. The loss of income was a serious blow. Stan Barrington, the head of the college security department, came to our aid. Stan gave us $5,000 to help out. I was deeply moved by his faith and trust in me, and so I gave him 24% of whatever was to come out of my efforts down the line. Neither of us ever expected much, and so far we have not been wrong. I have, however, paid Stan back his money, and now whatever he earns is extra. Stan is in charge of printing information and the sale of my papers and tapes. Stan Barrington is my only authorized representative. Moore was proved to be an agent when, by his own admission, on July 1st, 1989, he stated that he had participated in spying on fellow researchers, had changed documents, had put out disinformation, and had helped run a scam on Paul Benowitz that had resulted in Mr. Benowitz being confined to a mental institution. Moore stated that he had been recruited by an intelligence agency and that he knew he had been recruited. He was a witting agent. No one acknowledged that I had been right. From that point on, my Annie and I were followed and harassed. Death threats began showing up on our answering machine. The phone would ring several times during the night, but no one would reply when we answered. Sometimes a man would deliver another death threat. Government cars would park in front of, and well-dressed men watched the house. The strangest people began to show up at our door, sometimes in the middle of the night. I purchased a .380 automatic for Annie and a 9mm for me. I taught Annie how to shoot, and she will not hesitate to kill anyone who attempts to harm me, her, or our daughter. Annie and Pooh, which is Dorothy's nickname, are the lights of my life. Annie and I were married on July 4th, 1989. Pooh was born May 30th, 1990. My most touching memory of Annie is of the time 12 hours of labor when we were finally in the delivery room. She had taken no drugs. She had not been given a spinal tap. She did everything naturally. She was drained of energy and was experiencing great pain. She was numb. After a really hard push, she looked up at me with all the innocence and trust of a little child and asked, "Did the baby come yet?" It was very hard for me to tell her that the baby was not yet born, but that is what I did. She seemed to waver for a moment, but only a moment. Annie quickly regained her composure. I could see the love in her eyes as she looked up at me. I squeezed her hand. She took a deep breath and pushed Pooh's little head out into the world. The doctor suctioned the baby's mouth. Then Annie gave her all, a push that seemed to come from her very soul, and little Dorothy popped out, announcing her presence with a great cry. I am so proud of Annie. She is my hero, and Pooh is my always and forever friend. At one point, I became very upset with the intimidation. I went out to the government car at the curb. I showed the man in the car my 9mm pistol, and I told him we were fed up with their intimidating tactics. I told him that if he or anyone else wanted to know something about me, they should come to the house, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and I would be happy to tell them anything that they want to know. I informed him that if any further attempt was made to harass me or my family, I would not hesitate to use my pistol. I then walked behind his car, wrote down the license plate number. He started the car, drove off, and we have not detected any overt signs of surveillance since that day. They did not give up on us. No one knew the location of our new house when we moved to Arizona. However, when we drove into the driveway, a government car showed up right behind us. The man got up and said he was lost and wanted to know who lived there. I asked him why he wanted to know. He stated that he was a census taker. He said it was his job to ensure that no one out here in the country was left out of the census. He asked my name. I told him to get off the property and to never come back. He protested, but left when he saw I was serious. I merely asked Danny to get my pistol out of the car. Now, many people would say that I was paranoid in this instance until they discover that census takers do not drive government cars. Makes sense. I was at the post office one morning when a country sheriff's deputy asked the clerk at the window next to the one where I was buying stamps if William Cooper had rented a box. I smiled as the clerk handed him my rental agreement and he copied the information. He didn't learn anything, as we live in the country where there is no address. The form had only Stolen Boulevard listed. A lot of people live on Stolen Boulevard. We have been taken advantage of by every crooked conman, TV producer, scriptwriter, author, and flim-flam expert that there is in this country. I have learned that the TV and print media reporters and producers that I have met are pack flyers. They are not objective and don't give a damn about the truth. The only really open media left to the public is talk radio, and even talk radio won't discuss certain subjects. My material has been copied, changed, and even plagiarized. A lot of people have used my material to make money without my knowledge or permission. A Hollywood producer wanted to buy the exclusive rights to my story for $1. Bill Hamilton begged me to let him include my material in his book entitled Alien Magic. He pretended to be a friend, and I let him. I asked for no money, and he offered none. His entire book consists of other people's material. He now accuses me of stealing his information. Bill Hamilton turned out to be just another UFO fake. I have since learned that I am not the only person of whom he has taken advantage. The most damaging scam was perpetrated by two old has-been actors turned conmen, named Michael Callan and Douglas Dean. I doubt seriously that you'll remember either one. Callan was a regular in the cheapy teen beach blanket movies, and Dean never got beyond bit parts and chorus lines. I got involved with them when another actor named Bruce Reed called and asked if I would consent to meet with him and a friend who preferred to remain anonymous. I agreed that they could come to the house where we could talk on familiar turf. I was not eager to meet with someone I did not know, and especially with an anonymous person away from familiar surroundings. Reed and friend showed up at my home, and the friend turned out to be Callahan. They told me that they had read my material and wanted to help. What a joke that statement turned out to be. They told me that they knew how to get me in front of millions of people where I could deliver my message. Callan was slick. He told me he was only interested in helping spread the information, but talked me into signing a 5-year management contract that gave him a full 20% of the gross of all of my earnings, no matter what the source. He swore that if he didn't show results within 6 months, he would tear up the contract. The first thing that Callan did was shaft his partner, Bruce Reed. He cut Reed out of the action to prevent me from finding out that he had done it, only to get Reed's half of the 20%. Callan told me that Bruce was a drug dealer. Callan said that the public would find out eventually, and Reed's drug involvement would damage me. Everything Callan told me about Reed turned out to be a lie. Stan Barrington called me next, wanting to know why I was trying to dump him. I didn't know what he was talking about. It turned out that Callan was trying to force Stan into giving up his 24% so that Callan could form a 50-50 partnership with me. I told Stan I had no intention of dumping him. I told him that his 24% was his, that he could keep it, sell it, or give it away, and that he did not need my permission. Stan felt much better after that conversation, told Callan to go fly a kite. At that point, Callan began working on me to get rid of Stan. I refused. I also told him that he had nothing invested and therefore did not warrant anything. His job was to manage according to our contract. Douglas Dean entered the picture at the January 7, 1989 lecture that I gave at the Showboat Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Callan brought him to videotape the lecture so that we could have a tape to sell for those thousands of people who pleaded with us to produce a tape. The agreement was that he would tape the event and the tapes would belong exclusively to me. In return, if the tapes turned out good, Dean would get a contract to produce future tapes. The tapes were terrible, and I told both Dean and Callan that I did not want tapes that poor quality being sold to anyone. They did it anyway behind my back and began the process of stealing my master tapes from all my other lectures. At the same time, Callan drained all the business accounts. He borrowed $1,400 from Stan to produce tapes and then kept the money and the tapes. A producer in Germany booked me to do a lecture in that country. To secure the agreement, he sent $3,000 to be used for 2 first-class tickets and as a guarantee that when I got there, I would not be canceled. The producer canceled when a German postal strike prevented him from advertising the event. Callan kept the man's $3,000. I did not find out about that until after I had fired Callan. At my lecture in San Diego, at Whole Life Expo, I found out that Dean was selling tapes and asking people to make checks out to Need to Know Productions, a phony company. I immediately fired Dean. I informed Callan that we were to do no more business with him whatsoever. I discovered Callan was telling me that we were having tapes duplicated in Hollywood for $15 per tape, but in reality, Dean was doing it on VCRs at his home in Arizona. I asked Callan to return all of my master tapes for all of my lectures. He refused, and I fired him. When I got rid of Callan, he had stolen everything we had. We were literally left penniless. He was in possession of all of our master tapes from all of my lectures. We were broke and homeless at that point. If it had not been for a few good friends in Minnesota, we would not have survived. We would be in the streets today. Callan and Dean continue to injure us by selling the tapes from my lectures. We never get nothing from those sales. They are the most despicable con men and thieves you can imagine. I paid a visit to Dean's home one Saturday morning to ask him for my master tapes. He was not home, and after polite conversation with his handyman, I returned to my home. A few days later, the sheriff's department called and asked me if I had been to Dean's home that same Saturday. I told him I had. He asked me if I had tried to break into Dean's home, and I told him I had not. He thanked me, and that was the end of it. I had no idea what it was all about until I was served with a restraining order. It seems that Dean's guilty conscience had made him afraid that I would return. He slit his own tires, made a report to the sheriff that I had done it, and then procured a restraining order from the local court. I have never been questioned or accused by the police or sheriff other than what I have already disclosed. I believe that their goal from the very beginning was to try and destroy my efforts at educating American people. They damn near succeeded. Well, that's it. That's the introduction. That's the foreword. And that gives us a much better idea of who Bill Cooper is as a person. It's going to be interesting. The very next thing we tackle next Wednesday morning is going to be, I always call it the wrong thing. So let me get me sure here. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. This one is a copy furnished by Mr. Tom Young, a fellow warrior in the cause of freedom. The excerpts printed word for word exactly as discovered. So we will go through that Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars next week. There is a whole lot of conspiracy theory that comes up around this one. So it won't just be me reading to you guys next week. I believe I can get the audiobook to read this one. Maybe, I can't remember. But either which way, we'll learn that one together and go into some of the conspiracy theories. That's about it for me, I guess. We're almost at the 2-hour mark. I did not pay any attention to any chat at all because I had to read. Hopefully, like I said, when we're listening to it with the audiobook, I'll be able to discuss with you guys in the chat what's going on a little bit easier. Oh, you guys were having fun. That's good. It doesn't look like I've got any major questions, though. Boats versus ships for years. However, I lived less than a mile from the base. Yeah, I've heard people complain about that too. it's a boat, it's a ship, it's a, but it's not. So I think that was probably one of his little irritations. But yeah, thank you very much, you guys. As long as you don't have any questions, doesn't look like you do, I will sign off for today. And next week we'll be back with a little bit more conspiracy. All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Love ya.